back to the ISSR In Conversation series. I'm Anthony K. Nairn, Assistant Director at ISSR and the host of the ISSR YouTube channels. ISSR In Conversation is a discussion series in which ISSR Fellows discuss topics related to their work and developments in the academic field of science and religion. In this episode, the pedagogy of science and religion and the classroom context are discussed. And this episode will be especially interesting to anyone who engages with teaching in this field, or teaching generally, or anyone interested in how science and religion are taught at the university level in different geographic and cultural environments. In conversation for this video are Matthias Determann, a professor of history in the Liberal Arts and Sciences program at the Virginia Commonwealth University School of the Arts in Qatar, specializing in the history of science, technology, and scholarship in the Middle East, and Shoaib Ahmed Malik, a lecturer in science and religion in the School of Divinity at New College, University of Edinburgh. He's working at the intersection of Islamic theology and the contemporary sciences. If you enjoy this content and want to see or hear more, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us keep content like this coming. And this is also available on most major podcasting services. So consider subscribing on your favorite podcast service to enjoy listening on the go. You can access the podcast link directly and all other links relevant to ISSR and the speakers here today using the links in the box below. Please enjoy this episode of ISSR In Conversation.
Hey everyone. So I'm going to have a wonderful conversation with Matthias on the pedagogy of science and religion. Matthias, welcome. It's good to have you here. It's not the first time we've spoken, but it's good to see a friendly and familiar face. How are you doing?
Very, very good, Shoaib. It's a wonderful time to talk about religion from Doha, Qatar, here where I'm based. It's the middle of Ramadan, sort of a very, very special time. For me, it's also the middle of the semester, so it's nice to talk about teaching as well. So I'm very excited about our conversation.
Yeah. So we wanted to focus on the pedagogy of science religion. What kind of teaching things can we pick up from experienced people, as well as, for those who are just getting to the field, what are the do's and don'ts? So Matthias and I mean, we go back a few years now. Interestingly, we met online. We actually became close colleagues over COVID. We actually had our first conference on extraterrestrials and Islamic theology, which I'm really proud of. We have an edited volume. I don't have a copy in front of me, but it was one of the things that I really enjoyed working with Matthias on. So Matthias, let's get straight into it, right? How did you get into science and religion as a starting point, and how did you get into teaching this area?
Thank you so much. So I've been fascinated by scientific questions as a historian of science. However, I've also been interested in religious questions. I don't teach theology, but I teach history. I teach history of the Middle East, history of the Islamic world, and history of science. And you can't really teach the history of the Middle East or the history of the Islamic world or the history of science without talking about religion either. So religion has always been part of these history of science courses, science studies courses that I've taught here at Virginia Commonwealth University in Qatar. My students here in Doha, they come with a lot of religious knowledge, in particular about Islam. So it's really has been wonderful to explore with them that entire field of science and religion. What about you, Shoaib? How did you get to become a teacher, an instructor in science and religion?
So I think my journey was, I think, far more radical than yours. It seems like yours was, pieced into your specialization. For me, so I started off as an engineer, chemical engineering in particular, and we don't talk about religion in the classroom in engineering and an engineering department. But what happened was, by the end of my first PhD, I was just like, I have questions, and they really just start off because my supervisor, Professor Sean Rigby, who's an amazing guy. He just asked me questions about religion. I didn't know the answers to them. And that just set me off on a particular trajectory. I knew by the end of my PhD that I wasn't going to be an engineer, or I wasn't too serious about engineering. So I was on a hunt. I got into science religion very easily. I was very thankful that Edinburgh opened up their MSc in science religion. And that's why it feels surreal that I'm now an instructor for the very same school now where I teach that program. But yeah, for me, it was a long and hard edifying journey myself, because I was picking up so many things, because it's such a radical shift from engineering to theology. And I think during my learning curve as a student, that's when I started feeling the need that there need to be, courses around, at least from my side, on Islam and science, because I saw there were many courses on science religion. Most of them were from, Christian perspectives. And I felt that there was a real need to introduce courses that have, an Islamic aspect to them. So I started developing my own, and I started teaching online. And that was my first, I would say, experience in teaching science and religion. They really picked up during COVID. And I think that opened the door to many other, institutions wanting to have such programs. So now it's you can see, I've taught at various institutions like Cambridge Muslim College here in the UK, Balagh Academy. And so now there's, I think, a growing recognition that this is an area of interest. And what's interesting more for me as an instructor is the amount of demand for it. I think people are really curious. And I think that it fits into, just because it fits into, I think, at least to some degree, because of the whole atheism, theism polemics, where science is being used as a weapon. But also, I think personal curiosities, right? Like students come in from all walks of life to try and understand these things. So that's how I got into teaching the field. And now, I teach it at the University of Edinburgh. So I teach physics and theology, evolution, theological anthropology, which is very interesting. We are actually, I think I can say this. Yeah, so we actually just approved our first Islam and Science module or course that'll be part of our MSc program. And this will be both in person and online. So we're making good strides, and I'm just excited to be in a very interesting time for the field of Islam and science. That's my backstory.
That's really wonderful. And you're perhaps one of the most qualified persons in this entire field, not just qualified in terms of the research that you've done, but also in terms of actual academic qualifications, right? You have a PhD in engineering, you have a PhD in theology, you have a postgraduate certificate in education, and various other degrees. So you're really an expert in not just how to research that field, but also in how to teach science and religion, and especially Islam and science. And congratulations on the approval of that module. That's really fantastic. I wanted to ask you, obviously you have that specialization in Islam and science, but maybe which particular topics in Islam and science, or broadly in science and religion, do you enjoy teaching the most?
Right. That's a good one. I think I really enjoy dabbling into many different areas. I think that's one of the things I really like about the field. So when I was younger, I kept reading about the history of science. So Isaac Newton, Boyle, right? Einstein, all these big guys. And one of the things that I really admired about them was that they were all over the place. I mean, they wrote about everything. They thought about as many things as they could. I think today we are boxed in by our PhDs. And what I really, really enjoy about the field of science religion is that there's very little boxing. So one day I could be doing history of science religion. The other day I can be teaching about physics and theology, quantum mechanics, for example. Another day I can be teaching about evolution. And I think that diversity is what makes it super exciting for me. And walking through various conversation points with students is something I really love. So I don't think I think the whole field is just fascinating. But if I were to choose some key areas that I really, really enjoy, I think they vary just based on my research. So right now I'm very interested in AI. So a lot of my research is now, gravitating around artificial intelligence and how it impacts religious discourses. And so walking students through various questions like, what is human nature, right? What are classical conceptions of human nature and human uniqueness? How are those being challenged by things like AI, right? So that's a new conversation that I love having with my students in the classroom. Another area that I always enjoy is something called divine action models. So or DAMs, they're known as short, right? So these are just various accounts of how do you look at the interplay between God and creation, right? So you have God, creation, and then you have a connection between the two. And within this space, you have a variety of different models. So you've got deism, where God just created and just left creation to its own devices. And the other side, you have occasionalism, where God is literally involved in every single affair, moment to moment, thing to thing. And then you have various accounts in between. And looking at those conversations in light of things like chaos theory, quantum mechanics, and walking through those models with students, I find really, really fun. So those are some, Matthias. How about yourself?
Thank you. So within the broader area of science and religion, I'm especially interested in biology, so the science of life, and then also astronomy and space exploration. These have been the foci of my research as well. Life biology is great because a lot of just ethical questions sort of come together in the biological sciences, right? Genetic engineering, for instance, designer babies, right? Sort of quote unquote playing God, right? Should we humans play God? But there are lots and lots of really, really interesting ethical questions that you can look at from different angles. You can look at it from the perspective of religion. You can look at it from the perspective of sociology or philosophy or political science. And I agree with what you said earlier, that science and religion is this really wonderful field where, again, like I'm not sort of boxed in one particular discipline. I'm not boxed in just in history, but I can sort of have wide-ranging debates. And my students usually are from more than one discipline. So I often have art historians in my classroom, a lot of designers because I teach at an art and design school. So I have fashion designers, painters, interior designers, so people who neither have a theological background nor a natural science background, but people who certainly like these looking at these important scientific issues from different angles. So for instance, the questions, what sort of genetic modifications parents or scientists should be allowed to do to their children, that's sort of something that pretty much all of my students find appealing. So these biological questions are very, very interesting. Then I also mentioned astronomy and space exploration. But there are a lot of connections to politics that my politically interested students are very, very interested in discussing. Some of the richest people in the world are currently very, very active in space programs. So I'm thinking of Elon Musk here as the head of SpaceX, but also Jeff Bezos as the head and founder of Blue Origin. Space is indeed the domain of very, very wealthy and very, very powerful people. About a lot of people probably have an opinion. So just like people in Scotland, where you are, or people in Canada or in the United States have an opinion about Elon Musk, for instance, or Jeff Bezos, or powerful figures like them. So do my students too. And what I find interesting is, again, sort of looking at politics, looking at ideology, and also at the various religious dimensions of space exploration. So there have been fascinating studies by Mary Jane Rubenstein and others about the religious dimensions of humans going to the final frontier. So for instance, Apollo astronauts, they read from Genesis as they were traveling from the Earth to the moon and back. The whole idea of sort of, is it our destiny to go to the stars, right? Is it our destiny to colonize Mars, right? But that sort of has been compared in many ways by to sort of other kinds of manifest destiny. So the colonization of the frontier in 19th century America, the idea that God has given humans or certain peoples specific lands to settle in, to colonize in. So really, really interesting discussions here that I can have with my students about space exploration. And in my experience, a lot of students, they just love astronomy or space, even if they are not astrophysicists themselves.
So I think we both share the fact that there's diversity both in our students, because they come from all walks of life, and diversity in, with respect to topics that we can cover. But I'm sure that comes with its own host of challenges. So Matthias, in your day-to-day affairs with your students, what kind of challenges have you encountered, and how have you overcome them?
Thank you so much. That's a really great question. A lot of my own students are not biology majors or astrophysics majors or astronomy majors. Hence, their understanding of the science is often quite limited. Talking about biology, for instance, a lot of my students, in my experience, at least at the beginning of my courses, would have very limited understandings of core elements of modern biology, such as evolution in particular. In the eyes of some of my students, when they think about evolution, they think about the idea that humans descend from monkeys. Sort of a very simple idea. And most of my students here in Doha are Muslims who've been taught to reject that particular notion in particular. Most of my students have been taught most of their life about the idea that humans are a separate creation from animals, and they would like to put the maximum distance between humans and monkeys in particular. It would take me a while to, for instance, get the students to understand that evolution does not necessarily mean that sort of we descend from monkeys. It means more that we have a common ancestry, right? So that we share a large number of genes with other primates. And so this points to a common ancestry. And sort of you can make similar argument about obviously like all life, right? That humans and plants share many genes, humans and bananas, for instance. And sort of one can go back to sort of a common origin here. And if one focuses on origins in that way, that we all go back perhaps to one kind of origin, then maybe for some students, the idea of evolution is more reconcilable with religion. The idea that we ultimately come from one sort of one origin, perhaps one first cell, maybe sort of cosmologically go back to one Big Bang, perhaps. And of course, one origin, the oneness, that's also a central element in Islam, and also a central element in the Wahhabi tradition that has been very, very influential in Qatar, where I teach. So the idea that it all goes back to some kind of one origin, perhaps can be sort of aligned with that concept of tawheed, of sort of monotheism, of sort of a oneness at the beginning. So yeah, that has been one of my challenges, like limited understanding of biological evolution in particular, and then maybe I leave it at that for the moment, but I would love to hear about your challenges as well. What have you faced, Shoaib?
So I think to some extent I've had similar challenges like yourself, where explaining just the science of evolution is a steep curve, particularly for those who don't have a scientific backbone, no STEM experience whatsoever. And that's usually the case with every classroom that you have. So in my own settings, I have, for example, students who come in from philosophy or theology. There's usually just one or two scientists who are interested in science or religion. So just to getting them to understand what science is. So this notion that there is the scientific method, which is a misnomer. There are actually many scientific methods. It varies from discipline to discipline. Getting them to appreciate that is, I think, the first hurdle. But I would say for me, one of the biggest ones that I think is most challenging for students is quantum mechanics, right? Particularly the idea of what is the wave potential and what does a wave collapse mean, and the different interpretations that come about. And that's tricky just because there are numerous interpretations over what the wave function is, but it just, what does it exactly mean that electron, when it goes through two slits, it has these possibilities? What does that mean? Does that mean the electron is a particle, or is it a wave and interfering with itself? So just getting students comfortable with those notions, particularly if they've never heard of these things before, is a challenge. And the way I get around it there's a very famous video that came out, I think 10 years ago. It's a cartoon video that really explains it really well. And I walk through students with that. And it really allows me to break down those concepts in a much more digestible way. The other thing that I do is I use a lot of metaphors, right? One of the first things, so I think this is where my training and my teaching in science, which I used to do in Dubai, it gets really handy. Because in science, there's so many abstract concepts that you have to teach, right? So like things like pressure, things like ideal gas laws and all of that. And what you're in fact doing is you're constructing ideal fictions, models, and to some extent, you're utilizing metaphors to be able to take what the students know to what they don't know. And that's the function of a model or a metaphor. And I think that helps a lot with being able to teach science in science resident classrooms. So those are the ways that I've been able to get around that is really by using a lot of video content and metaphors in my lessons, and allow the students to question whenever there's ambiguity. I think that's always helpful in getting their thoughts clarified. So those are just some. Those are some from my side. Cheers.
That's great. Yeah. You mentioned videos. Like I use a lot of like short video clips, especially as well. And I'm a very big fan of using science fiction in particular in some of my classes, right? When I talk about the history of science, for me, that's connected to the culture of science. And of course, science fiction is part of the culture of science. Science fiction films are part of the visual culture of science, how scientists are represented. And there are many, many wonderful films that speak about ethical problems in particular. So for instance, when it comes to genetic engineering, I've always liked to assign Gattaca, a movie from the 1990s, so not necessarily at the cutting edge of where genetic engineering is now, but sort of a film that sort of visualized and dramatized many of the dilemmas, many of the concerns in the life sciences as well.
Right.
Yeah, you mentioned metaphors as well, sort of images. I also like to sort of speak about sort of words in particular a lot. For instance, whether we should use a word like colonization when it comes to space, right? Or whether we should sort of decolonize our own language when it comes to space exploration. Also often talk about translation. So for instance, when I talk about astronomy, I talk about the names of the planets. So in English, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and so on, that are named after gods and goddesses from the Greco-Roman pantheon, and sort of compare that in the Arabic, where you have names like Az-Zohra, Al-Marikh, Al-Mushtari, but where you have different associations. So I love using videos as well, and sort of discuss sort of concepts and words as well. Speaking of videos, you mentioned AI earlier, and obviously when we're talking about science, we are in an area very, very close to technology. So I wanted to ask you how do you sort of balance maybe technology in the classroom, various apps, various tools, including use of AI in your actual teaching, versus maybe more traditional methods, let's say chalk and talk, sort of a philosophical conversation, a dialogue between you and the students. In other words, how much technology use is there in your science and religion classroom?
So interestingly, I bring up AI a lot. I bring up ChatGPT a lot in my sessions, right? Interestingly, when I came for my interview at Edinburgh, I actually did a demo with ChatGPT in front of the audience, and so what I found to be really useful is ChatGPT is excellent for language barriers. So some of my students, their first language is not English. So I've had ChatGPT translate certain terms for me in the target language, be it Spanish, right? Or even Mandarin in case the term is not clear, and vice versa. When they're struggling to tell me what they're trying to say, we use ChatGPT quite a lot. So ChatGPT has become very instrumental for really opening up conversation lines I think would be very difficult prior to that. So it's very, very embedded now. And I also use ChatGPT for a lot of my presentation slides. It has this uncanny ability where you can just pluck up, certain text, and then it can summarize it into PDFs, into PPT slides. And I find that very, very beneficial, personally speaking. But there's a big but here, right? There is a big divide across the faculty over how pervasive AI can be or should be in both in your teaching and in your classroom. Some are very for it, some are very against it, some are skeptical and in the middle. I am very optimistic about AI. I make that very clear. I mean, like, I get people's concerns and all of that. It's going to sideline faculty, it's going to remove jobs and all of that. I'm just saying, as somebody who reads history, that we've had this happen every single era with new technologies emerging. I mean, back in the day, we were agriculturists, Industrial Revolution came, and now we're urbanized folks. The entire agricultural industry was largely shifted and metamorphosed into something very, very minimal in comparison to at least now, right? So at least in comparison to the past, sorry. So I just think we're going through another technological shift. It just seems a lot more, I think, daunting, precisely because of the fact that it's very fast and it's very immediate, and that the implications are very quick. Unlike prior technologies that took their time, maybe across a generation or two. But here we're seeing changes within generations. So I think that's why people are a little bit freaked out by it. I don't know. How about you, Matthias?
Thank you so much. So I'm privileged in that I have small classrooms, I have small class sizes. So I typically have a maximum of like 15 students in the classroom. So there is a lot of like just time for sort of in-person conversations. I also have a lot of time for students to come to my office indoor for to my office for one-on-one conversations. And I do value that sort of the personal aspect, the unmediated aspect that I can talk to the students without the need of technology. And I think that's also one of the this unique selling propositions of the particular campus that I'm in, as opposed to like a massive online course, right? So there are universities like the Open University probably that are able to deliver an online course much better to a lot more students than I'm able to do that. So I do like to have a lot of like conversations with my students, and a lot of that being unmediated by technology, just directly. However, I share what you said as well, and I agree with it. So I have a lot of students for whom English is a second language, as it is for me. I'm a native speaker of German. So artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, or even just Google Translate is really, really good at making translations that one can use in many ways. I encourage the students to use artificial intelligence, to experiment with the various different apps. So you mentioned ChatGPT, but there are so many other apps as well. There's Midjourney, for instance, which is often better for images. There's Copilot, the Microsoft product, and there's AI built in various other software built in Adobe, Photoshop, for instance, AI built into Canva. There's so many different apps that nobody in my classroom, including me, can be an expert in all of them. And constantly these apps are changing. You have updates, there are differences between free versions and premium versions, and so on. So I very much encourage my students to experiment with different apps and sort of have an open conversation with me about the benefits of each particular app, but also the limits of them. So, for instance, what I found across my courses is that that AI tools are very good at creating text, and they're very good at creating images. But they are not very good, at least not so far, at creating images with text. So often the images that have text on them, that text has like spelling mistakes and sort of all other kinds of odd elements as well. So that's definitely a weakness of a lot of AI software so far. Similarly, another weakness so far, at least in many software, is about creating citations, right? Sort of, so AI can sort of produce an essay for you, but then sometimes the bibliography might include titles with real authors, but not with books that they actually wrote. Sort of the AI might actually be just hallucinating titles here. So I definitely encourage the students here to be careful and to just and to discuss with me the limits of that. In my history courses, in particular, I also want to sort of make sure the students still understand the value of actual historical images, right? Sort of, yes, you can have an AI produce an image for you about 19th century Mecca, for instance, but there is value to having an actual photograph or an actual drawing from 19th century Mecca, and not just the maybe more aesthetically appealing, more beautiful AI-generated images.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there, Matthias. I think that's a way more nuanced answer than I presented. Our university has been careful. They already released an in-house AI that the students can use. So they say, you have free reign to this. The problem is just to do with the assignments, which I'm sure you've probably encountered as well, is if we have things like ChatGPT available or LLMs available, how do you know the difference between a genuine assignment written by a student versus something that's been generated by ChatGPT, for instance? And I think most teachers who know their students relatively well, they can kind of pick out, I know what these students are able to do, but you have things like false positives, right? So yeah, how have you dealt with that issue, Matthias?
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's a really, really difficult challenge. I would have dealt with sort of the issue of sort of over-reliance on AI, or plagiarism, if you want to use that word, in two ways. One way is I would really encourage the students to use their own voice, right? And sort of bring in their own perspectives, bring in their own experiences, share their own stories as well, and sort of spice up the text with that. I found that AI often produces texts that are very bland, but that are perfect in terms of grammar, perfect in terms of sort of spelling and concepts and so on, but sometimes sort of very corporate, but very sort of uncontroversial. AI would produce a text for you that wouldn't often be very radical, wouldn't often be very provocative, right? Wouldn't be very edgy, right? It's essentially sometimes the kind of corporate output that you would not get sued over. So bland, but I would encourage the students, yes, have your own unique voice and sort of, and if you are a non-native speaker of English, sort of bring in that voice and don't be shy. Like your texts don't have to be written like a professor from Oxford or Cambridge, right? Your text can be written by and sound like it was written by a person from Doha, from Qatar, sort of reflecting local experiences. What I've also done for years as well is encourage students to actually present their work, read their work to the class, and discuss it with the other students. So not just submit it to me, not just send it to me, but actually, if you have a text, read it, perform it for us, and sort of show your mastery of the material, but this way. This has also helped years ago when sort of AI wasn't as advanced. I've had, for instance, issue with problems at times with contract cheating, right? Where a student would pay somebody else to write an essay for them. And I remember years ago, a student who wrote the most perfect essay about the causes of the French Revolution. Sort of an essay that I could not have possibly written. It's one of the best things that I've ever seen. And what I did is I asked the student sort of, okay, read your essay aloud to the rest of the class. And then obviously it came clear that the student had probably not written the text. They stumbled upon words. They couldn't pronounce the French words very well. That was almost lesson enough for them to sort of just, being embarrassed by not being able to read out supposedly their own text properly to the class. I didn't have to humiliate that particular student any further. It was sort of clear, yes, the student had not written this particular text. So yeah, getting the students to actually present their texts to the classroom audience and discuss it and answer questions by me and by their peers on the spot in the classroom. So even if the students used help, even if they used ChatGPT, sort of they should still display the mastery of the text that their names are attached to as authors.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good way. I think that's a good way of sieving it out. Okay. And so, Matthias, we've talked about challenges, but have you been teaching in Doha your entire life, or did you teach elsewhere before this? And if so, what were those changes like?
Thank you. So I first taught not history, but German language at King Saud University in Riyadh. Then I taught as a graduate teaching assistant at the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, the University of London. Then I taught at the Berlin Graduate School, Muslim Cultures and Society at Freie Universität Berlin. And for the last 12 years or so, I've taught at Virginia Commonwealth University in Qatar. So I've taught undergraduate students as well as graduate students, all the way from the PhD. I've taught students of various majors, art, design, history, religious studies, Islamic studies, German language. I would say my main difference between let's say teaching in the UK, teaching at SOAS, and teaching here in Qatar was that at SOAS I had a lot more mature students. I had a lot older students often. I remember one of my best students, he was a London bus driver with a family, with kids, who really wanted to do a history degree in addition to that. And he was very, very serious. He was very, very committed. And I really enjoyed having somebody like that who sort of came with a different life experience, came with different paths and knowledge to the classroom.
Was he a seminarian by any chance, Matthias?
Sorry?
Was he a seminarian graduate by any chance? I'm just thinking it's a person I may know. Was he a seminarian graduate? Was he a graduate of the seminary?
I don't quite remember. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. So I had sort of students like that, whereas in Doha, here I teach at American students where I have sort of typically like 18 to 22-year-old students. Who are maybe diverse in their own way. So what I enjoy about teaching in Doha is maybe I teach students of the same age group, but then I get students from Qatar, but also from places like Sudan, from Yemen, from Syria, and so on. People with passports for whom it is often very, very difficult to go to Western countries, to go to countries in the global north. So maybe this is just to say that I've taught a diversity of students, and I know in America in particular, under the new government, diversity has become sort of a sensitive word, a difficult word. But sort of I just want to emphasize really how I've often sort of sought out and cherished the diversity among my students. I love that in London, for instance, I had these students, anything from a bus driver to somebody from wealthier backgrounds. And in Doha, I cherished that I have students from sort of all over the Middle East and the global South in particular, who, each of them have something contribute something unique and something that I myself cannot offer. What about you, Shoaib? You've taught at a vast range of different institutions, online and offline. Do you want to maybe compare the settings or the students there?
So I think I'll compare two big things, right? So I was in the UAE from 2014 till 2024, and I was an assistant professor of the natural sciences. So I taught mostly chemistry, organic chemistry, environmental chemistry, analytic chemistry, labs, and that kind of thing. And in Dubai, I was mostly teaching undergrads. In fact, it was all undergrads. And for the most part, it was just women. I think 95% of my classes were just female cohort. And that's because Zayed University was designed for just the women of the UAE. And that was a very interesting experience. So you have to kind of, make sure that you are able to relate what you're teaching them to the goals of the nation. Because the very function of Zayed University is to make sure that the students that they're producing is able to feed into the priorities of the nation. So at least I was part of two programs, environmental, I think one was public health and nutrition, and one was environment and sustainability, right? And so they had some core courses, chemistry being one of them. And so I remember, being very practical in my classes, right? Why are you studying, for example, acid-base titrations? Why are you studying, for example, these specific lines of experimentation? Because they will have, these are skill sets that you can use when you graduate, when you leave our doors. And for me, it was just a phenomenal experience because even though I was born and raised in Kuwait, right? I mean, but Kuwait has its own cultural system. UAE is slightly different, even though they were part of the Khaliji area. But I did notice some idiosyncrasies that made that experience very edifying. Now I am in Edinburgh. I am teaching, and one more thing. So most of them were, all of them were women, and they were all, I think, as far as I can tell, were Muslim, right? Now I'm in an environment where I'm teaching just postgraduates, right? So I'm not teaching undergraduate courses here. I'm also teaching people that are from all walks of life. So they're not just Emiratis, they're not, just Muslim, they're from all walks of life. And I'm teaching the humanities. So it's like a big flip when I moved to Edinburgh. And it's been very interesting to see the both the similarities across both sides as well as the differences. I'd say the strongest differences are that you see people's lived experiences come to the classroom here at Edinburgh. That's one of the biggest things that I've been picking up. So, for example, we have in one classroom we have a guy who's from one of the Bible states, so a creationist environment, but yet he's one of the most open people I've seen in terms of thinking about evolution. We've got a Jesuit priest. We've got two Chinese students, right? We've got one Irish guy who was in media studies. He decided to do his MSc in science or religion. And all those experiences come into a very interesting melting pot that makes for a very diverse environment. And they, of course, challenge you in different ways, right? So with the UAE, my challenge was, how can I make these difficult scientific concepts more accessible to these students? For these guys, it's about connecting different threads. So this person is coming with a particular inquiry. How can I link this inquiry to their particular worldview in terms of what kind of challenges and things that they can think about? So it's a very, very, very different set of experiences. In addition to this switch from being a professor of science and now going into a lecturing role as in the humanities, focusing on science and religion. One of the things I also do is teach in seminary spaces. So, and this is mostly online. So things like Cambridge Muslim College and Al-Balagh Academy, Lotri Foundation, several others. And that experience has been very, very interesting from another angle, because this is now you have a cohort of people who are coming in to learn about because I just teach mostly Islamic theology and science and religion. So how can Islamic theology converse with contemporary challenges? And here you have a lot of sensitivity, right? So and there's because there are different attitudes here. So some people have this attitude that the tradition has all the answers, it's fixed in stone, that's it, we're just sticking to that. The problem with that is that clearly the tradition, at least some components that are outdated, we need to revise, we need to rethink a few things, right? So just because Ghazali spoke about something 1,000 years ago does not necessarily mean it applies to today. I'm saying this as somebody who loves Ghazali. I use him in my work as an interlocutor, right? There are other people who are very, very pro, everything that should be completely revised. I think that's maybe, the other side of the extreme. I think the answer is usually somewhere in the middle. And to just take that entire, classroom and show them, first of all, what are the theological conversations, what are the scientific conversations, and then putting them into proximity without offending anyone, without, destabilizing anyone's faith, is another, I think, experience that I find very beneficial. Because for me, it goes to show, at least speaking as a Muslim, it goes it shows me where people are and how they're thinking about these conversations, science and religion. So my experience from the science side allows me to make the science easy in these spaces. My experience as a science or religion instructor and researcher allows me to kind of keep people away. It allows me to bring in the latest discussions into these spaces. So those are the three main, I think, environments that I've dealt with. And yeah, I like you, I value that diversity. I value the richness in that experience. But each one has its own set of challenges. And so you have to always be on your toes when you're talking about these kinds of things. That's what my experience has told me.
Great. That's wonderful. I think we share a lot of experiences here, even though that we've actually not taught at the same institution. But at Virginia Commonwealth University in Qatar, where I teach, for instance, just like you at Zayed University, I have mostly Muslim women, women who are either from the Gulf or who sort of grew up in the Gulf. And there are definitely also like challenges for me as a man, sort of as a white man, as a man from Europe. How do I relate to them? And I've drawn on very, very important women in my life to help me with that. So I'm married to a wonderful woman who grew up in the Gulf. Her name is Jan, and but she's originally actually from India. So she has sort of a local Gulf perspective, but also like more broadly a global South perspective. I have a 5-year-old daughter, Maria, who was born in Doha and who grows up in Doha. We also have a nanny in our house. I'm very, very privileged. But that means I'm actually living in our apartment in Doha with like 3 women or girls. So I definitely have a lot of conversations with them and sort of bring their perspective as sort of women who've lived in the Gulf region and sort of help me understand certain aspects and help me sort of better relate to the students that I'm teaching as well. So you mentioned also like making connections, right? Trying to connect different kinds of people. And yeah, I think diversity is a wonderful thing. And sometimes it's sort of the human connections that we can make that help us get the most of that diversity.
Yeah, I'm with you there. So the question now is, Matthias, I think, we, of course, both of us, we've had different experiences that we can draw from. The question that I think we should discuss now is, what would you advise new instructors to the field on how to go about teaching science and religion? What will be the do's and don'ts, Matthias? What would you say?
Thank you. We talked about this earlier. Generally, just display an openness towards AI, an openness towards technology, an openness towards people in general, an openness towards change as well. Discussions in science and religion, just like in many other fields, are changing as well. So we, as teachers and young teachers as well, should always try to be flexible and sort of not try to sort of be locked in on a certain method. So that's sort of one advice. But the other advice is that I would have, yes, we have all these technological tools, But something that we should also never forget is like the importance of human values. I'm thinking here especially of kindness, of sort of generosity, generosity with time, for instance. Yes, as teachers, we need to be sometimes strict and we need to be rigorous, of course. But I've always felt that we need to be kind, and this is also something that our students will remember. So my students will not remember everything that I will have taught them content-wise, but they will not remember everything that they've read in their books. But they probably remember how I made them feel. So if I made them feel bad or terrible in my classroom, in my interactions with them, they will remember that. And conversely, if I treat them with sort of kindness, with respect, with warmth, then they will remember that too. And hopefully when my own students themselves become teachers or become people in positions of authority, then they will also remember to be kind to others. But there's a sentence that I like from the Dalai Lama, the important religious figure, of course. Dalai Lama said, be kind whenever possible. It is always possible. So I've tried to remember that as a teacher. Yes, sometimes I have to give grades, bad grades as well to my students, but maybe even that I can deliver or find a way to deliver even bad news to the students in a kind way. So these would be the two main pieces of advice for younger colleagues. Try to be open to change, try to be flexible, but maybe also be constant in trying to be kind, trying to be generous, and trying to be sort of be a good human being ultimately. What about you, Shoaib? What are your pieces of advice for young instructors in our field?
It's interesting that you hit two notes that I strongly resonate with. I was going to say, first and foremost, is show epistemic humility, which falls in line with what you were talking about. Not be rigid, be flexible. I think anyone who specializes just in one discipline, let's say engineering, you'll immediately come to know what is fixed in the conversation and what are open speculations, right? This idea becomes even more important when you're looking at an inherently interdisciplinary environment like science or religion. You're going to realize very quickly what you do not know, right? So I can speak very comfortably about a few things in science religion, but I know there's a lot of things I cannot. I cannot talk about, for example, the nitty-gritties of the Judean Christianity, for example, right? Or I cannot talk about how Buddhism can speak to evolutionary biology, just because I've never seen material on that. So you begin to, realize very quickly there's a lot you don't know. And in the face of that, that shouldn't paralyze you. You shouldn't have intellectual paralysis. You should just make it clear that of all of this body of knowledge, I have expertise probably in these few things, and I can convey those confidently. But there's a lot of stuff I don't know. And so always be willing to learn from your students, be willing to engage with your students, and this is the most important thing, be willing to take on the hard questions. I think that sometimes I've noticed that young instructors in particular, they want to get everything right. They want to know everything beforehand. It's great to be well read. It's amazing to be well read. But that does not mean that it means that you'll be able to answer everything in the class. There will always be a few questions that a student will throw at you, or some students will throw at you, that you'll be like, I've never given this the light of day. So, you have to have that ability to say, I don't know. That's definitely one thing. And the other thing is, speaking to what you said about kindness, 100%. Actions do speak louder than words. So how you conduct yourself, how you carry yourself, how you have meaningful relationships with your students is very, very key. So just yesterday, for example, I had a very, I spend a lot of time outside the classroom whenever I can with my students. So for example, with this Jesuit priest I was talking about, we went out for coffee, for example. We had a lot of back and forth, and I loved that. That was phenomenal. I learned a lot about his lived experience. He learned a lot about mine. We shared a lot of similarities, and we just got to know each other. And I think that is always part of the this field, is that I love the fact that you have so many people with so many different experiences, and they educate you. They educate you about what you do not know. They educate you about what you can never know. And I think that's helpful here. Yeah. So, Matthias, I think we've, covered a lot of different topics here. And I think it's time to come to a close. But here is the opportunity for us to say something. If you were to say one thing to anyone who's watching, what would it be, Matthias? What would you say to the audience?
Remember that even when you're a teacher, you are still a student too, right? Try to have that attitude of sort of being always a student. And this goes back to what you said about epistemic humility. Like teaching and learning go together. I wish we had in the English language a word that would actually combine teaching and learning together. I'm not sure what word that would be. Teaching and learning, I'm not sure. Leaching, that doesn't sound good. So maybe we have to figure out it. But remember that you're always a learner, and I always try to remember and appreciate that I'm learning at least as much from my students and as they are from me. So yeah, try as a sort of last word from me, try to remember that you're always a learner as well as a teacher. What about you, Shoaib?
I think I'd echo the same thing. Just learn to be a student. Just because you have a PhD under your belt doesn't mean that you stop learning. I think that's very, very sound advice. And be open to hearing criticism, be open to hearing what the other side says. I think those go a long way. Great.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I hope that people online find it beneficial. And before you know it, I hope we'll be on another panel soon enough, Matthias.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this panel. I've always enjoyed reading your research, reading your books, reading your texts. But it's really, really nice and wonderful to be able to get a glimpse into your classrooms. I don't spend as much time in other people's classrooms as I would like. I spend a lot more time reading other people's books than I am actually in other people's classrooms. So it's really nice to sort of understand sort of that other side of you as well. Sort of you're an amazing scholar, but also a really great and beloved teacher. So I enjoyed that conversation, and I hope everybody was listening enjoyed it as well. Please feel free to connect with Shoaib and me. Shoaib is present on many different platforms, on Facebook and X and LinkedIn. And I know Shoaib, just as we both really enjoy being connected with people around the world, right? People who might not have the privilege to study at the universities that we are at, but we always love to engage in conversations in online spaces as well. So feel free to be in touch with us, and also be in touch with the International Society for Science and Religion that is kindly hosting us.
Yeah. In other words, ditto. I'll just one word and just copy paste what Matthias said, ditto. So thank you, Matthias, and thank you for everyone watching. Have a good day.
Thank you. Goodbye and ma'a salama.
Ma'a salama. Ma'a salama.